I thought I'd lost the love of my life forever when she married my best friend in 1982. What I discovered 40 years later at our high school reunion would change everything I thought I knew about love, betrayal, and second chances. Well, hello there, friends. Welcome back to Mind-Blowing Stories. I'm your host, Frank Morrison, and boy, do I have a doozy for you today. But before I dive into this incredible true story from my own past, I need to ask you something that honestly breaks this old man's heart a little bit every time I record one of these videos. I see that 96 of you wonderful folks watching right now aren't subscribed to my channel. Now I know, subscribing is just a click away, but it really does help an old-timer like me keep these stories coming. So if you could hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and maybe leave me a comment about your own experiences with love and loss, well, that would just make my whole week. Trust me, today's story is going to take you on an emotional roller coaster that you won't see coming. Now settle in with your coffee or tea, because what I'm about to share with you happened over 50 years ago, but it still gives me goosebumps every time I think about it. This is the story of Margaret Louise Henderson, the woman I thought was going to be my wife, and how one terrible misunderstanding cost us both 40 years of happiness. It was 1973, and I was a senior at Roosevelt High School in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Now, I know what you're thinking. Cedar Rapids isn't exactly the most romantic place on earth, but let me tell you, when you're 17 years old and head over heels in love, every cornfield looks like Paris, and every small-town diner feels like the Ritz-Carlton. Margaret, or Maggie as everyone called her, had moved to Cedar Rapids the summer before our senior year. Her father had taken a job at the Quaker Oats plant, and they'd relocated from somewhere down in Tennessee. Lord Almighty, when she walked into Mrs. Patterson's English class that first day of school, wearing a yellow sundress with little white flowers, and her auburn hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through those tall windows, every boy in that classroom forgot how to breathe. But Maggie wasn't just beautiful. She was smart as a whip, and had this laugh that could light up the darkest room. She had this way of tilting her head when she was really listening to you, like every word you said was the most important thing in the world. And her voice, well, it still had traces of that soft Tennessee accent that made even the most ordinary words sound like poetry. Now, I wasn't exactly the most confident kid in school. I was tall and lanky, all elbows and knees, with a cowlick that refused to stay down no matter how much Brill cream I used. I played second-string basketball and got decent grades, but I wasn't the kind of guy who usually caught the attention of girls like Maggie Henderson. But somehow, miracle of miracles, we ended up as lab partners in Mr. Rodriguez's chemistry class. And let me tell you, there was definitely some chemistry happening, if you know what I mean. We'd spend those 50-minute periods supposedly learning about molecular structures and chemical reactions, but really, we were just finding excuses to lean close to each other, to brush hands while reaching for the same beaker, to whisper and giggle over our experiments. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to ask her out. 3 weeks of rehearsing in the mirror, writing and rewriting what I was going to say, and getting advice from my best friend Tommy Sullivan, who claimed to be an expert on girls, despite having never actually had a girlfriend himself. I finally asked her on a Friday afternoon after chemistry class. My palms were so sweaty I thought I might drop my books, and my voice cracked like I was 13 again. But when I stammered out something about maybe wanting to take her to the Harvest Moon dance, she smiled that incredible smile and said, "I was wondering when you were finally going to ask me, Frank Morrison." That dance, friends, was the night I fell completely and utterly in love. We swayed to Color My World by Chicago, and I remember thinking that this was what happiness felt like, holding this amazing girl in my arms while the entire gymnasium faded away around us. When I walked her to her front porch that night and she kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet under the porch light, I knew I was going to marry this girl someday. The rest of our senior year was like something out of a movie. We were that couple, you know the type, holding hands in the hallways, sharing milkshakes at Murphy's Diner, studying together in the library where we did more talking and flirting than actual studying. I gave her my class ring, which she wore on a chain around her neck, and she gave me a St. Christopher medal that her grandmother had given her. We talked about everything, about our dreams and fears, about college and the future. Maggie wanted to be a teacher, maybe elementary school, because she loved working with kids. I was planning to study engineering at Iowa State, and we'd already talked about how we'd make the long-distance thing work, how I'd drive down to see her every weekend, how we'd write letters every single day. But our favorite thing was just driving around in my dad's old '67 Chevy pickup, listening to the radio and talking until the sun came up. There was this spot we'd found, a hill overlooking the Cedar River, where we'd park and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was there, on a warm evening in May, just 2 weeks before graduation, that I told Maggie I loved her for the first time. "I love you too, Frank Morrison," she whispered back, and I swear I could have died happy right there in that truck. Graduation came and went in a blur of caps and gowns and promises to stay in touch. Maggie was going to attend the University of Iowa that fall, studying education, while I was headed to Iowa State for engineering. We spent that entire summer practically joined at the hip, going to movies at the downtown theater, swimming at Ellis Park, working part-time jobs, and saving every penny for college while dreaming about our future together. But then, in mid-August, everything changed. I remember the day exactly, because it was my 18th birthday. I had plans to pick up Maggie at 6 o'clock, and we were going to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town, Luigi's Italian, where they had checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old wine bottles. I'd saved up for weeks to buy her a promise ring, nothing fancy, just a simple silver band with a small diamond chip, but it represented everything I felt for her. I was getting ready, trying to tame that stubborn cowlick and practicing what I was going to say when I gave her the ring. When the phone rang. It was my best friend Tommy Sullivan, and he sounded strange, nervous in a way I'd never heard before. "Frank, buddy, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." "What's wrong, Tommy?" There was this long pause, and I could hear him breathing heavy on the other end of the line. "It's about Maggie, man. I saw her today, at the park with someone else." My stomach dropped to my shoes. "What do you mean, someone else?" "She was with Jake Peterson, Frank. They were holding hands and they were kissing." Jake Peterson was a guy from our class, quarterback on the football team, one of those golden boys who seemed to have everything handed to him. He was heading to the University of Iowa on a football scholarship, same school where Maggie was going. "That can't be right, Tommy. You must have seen someone else." "I'm sorry, Frank, but it was definitely her. I wouldn't tell you this if I wasn't absolutely sure." I hung up the phone and just sat there on my bed, staring at the little velvet box in my hands. It didn't make sense. Just the night before, Maggie and I had been at our spot by the river, making plans for when we'd see each other at college. She'd seemed completely normal, completely in love with me. I decided Tommy must have been mistaken. Maybe he'd seen Maggie with a cousin or a family friend. Maybe the kissing part was just his imagination. So I got dressed, slicked back my hair, grabbed that ring box and my car keys, and drove to Maggie's house with my heart pounding. But when I pulled up to her house, her father's car wasn't in the driveway, and all the lights were off. I knocked on the door anyway, waited for what felt like hours, but nobody answered. I drove around town looking for her, checking all our usual spots, but she was nowhere to be found. Finally, around 10 o'clock, I gave up and went home, confused and hurt, and trying to convince myself there was some reasonable explanation for all of this. The next morning, I called her house bright and early. Mrs. Henderson answered, and her voice sounded different, cold, in a way I'd never heard before. "I'm sorry, Frank, but Margaret doesn't want to talk to you." "What? Mrs. Henderson, I don't understand. Did I do something wrong?" "She asked me to tell you that she's seeing someone else now, and she'd appreciate it if you didn't call anymore." The phone went dead in my hand, and I just stood there in my parents' kitchen, feeling like my entire world had just collapsed around my ears. I tried calling back several times over the next few days, but Mrs. Henderson would always answer and give me the same message. I drove by their house, but the curtains were always drawn, and nobody ever came to the door. I even asked some of our mutual friends if they knew what was going on, but everyone just shrugged and said they'd heard she was dating Jake Peterson now. Tommy tried to be supportive, but every time he'd start to say something comforting, I could see the pity in his eyes, and that almost made it worse. 2 weeks later, I left for Iowa State, heartbroken and confused, carrying that unopened ring box in my suitcase, like some kind of cruel reminder of what I'd lost. College was supposed to be a fresh start, but I couldn't stop thinking about Maggie. I'd lie awake in my dorm room, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of our relationship, trying to figure out where I'd gone wrong. Had I been too clingy, too boring? Had I said something that offended her? The questions ate at me like acid. I threw myself into my studies, determined to become the best engineer I could be, partly because I genuinely loved the work, but mostly because it kept my mind off of her. I made friends, dated other girls, tried to move on with my life, but nothing ever felt quite right. Every girl I met, I'd compare to Maggie, and they always came up short. Meanwhile, through the small-town grapevine, I'd hear updates about her life. She'd married Jake Peterson right after college, in a big ceremony at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Cedar Rapids. They'd moved to Des Moines, where Jake had taken a job with an insurance company. They'd had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. From all accounts, they seemed happy. And me? Well, I eventually did meet someone else. Her name was Linda, and she was a wonderful woman, kind and smart and patient with my emotional baggage. We got married in 1981, had 2 beautiful daughters, built a good life together in Minneapolis, where I'd landed a job with an engineering firm. Linda passed away 3 years ago, cancer, and I miss her every day. She was a good wife and mother, and I don't want you to think I didn't love her, because I did. But there was always a part of my heart that belonged to Maggie Henderson, and Linda, bless her soul, knew it too. Now here's where the story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming. Last fall, I got an invitation to my 50th high school reunion. 50 years. Can you believe that? Half a century since I'd walked across that gymnasium stage and shook Principal Johnson's hand, I almost didn't go. Most of my old friends had either moved away or passed on, and the thought of making small talk with a bunch of old-timers I barely remembered didn't exactly appeal to me. But something about that invitation kept nagging at me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just the foolish hope that I might see Maggie again, even though I knew she probably wouldn't be there. After all, she'd only spent 1 year at Roosevelt before moving away. So I bought a plane ticket back to Cedar Rapids, rented a car, and drove to the reunion at the Marriott downtown, feeling like a nervous teenager all over again. The banquet hall was decorated with black and gold streamers, our school colors, and there were poster boards covered with old yearbook photos and newspaper clippings. A DJ was playing hits from the early 70s, and clusters of gray-haired, slightly stooped people stood around talking and laughing, trying to recognize each other behind all the years and wrinkles. I'd been there about an hour, nursing a beer and making polite conversation with people whose names I couldn't quite remember, when I saw her. She was standing by the registration table, pinning on a name tag, and even though her auburn hair was now silver, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 50 years ago, I knew her instantly. Maggie Henderson, just as beautiful as ever. My heart started pounding like I was 18 again, and for a moment I considered just leaving, sneaking out before she saw me. But then she turned, and our eyes met across that crowded room, and the 50 years between us just melted away. She walked over to me, and I could see she was nervous too, twisting her wedding ring around her finger the way she used to do when she was thinking hard about something. "Hello, Frank." "Hi, Maggie." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and then she did something that surprised me. She started crying, right there in front of everyone. "Oh, Frank, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand what she was apologizing for, but seeing her cry broke my heart all over again. I took her arm gently and led her out to the hotel lobby, where we could talk privately. "Maggie, what's wrong? What are you sorry for?" She sat down on one of those hotel lobby chairs, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and for the longest time she couldn't speak. Finally, she looked up at me with those same green eyes I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, and she said, "Frank, I never stopped loving you, not for one single day in 50 years. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. But Maggie, you married Jake. You chose him over me." She shook her head vigorously. "No, Frank, that's not what happened at all. I never chose anyone over you." And then she told me a story that turned my entire understanding of my past upside down. "Do you remember that summer, right before we left for college? How happy we were, how we kept talking about our future together." Of course I remember. Well, Jake Peterson had been asking me out all senior year, and I kept turning him down because I was with you. But he wouldn't give up. He kept saying that long-distance relationships never work, that you'd forget about me as soon as you got to college, that I was just wasting my time. She paused, wiping her eyes again. Then, about a week before your 18th birthday, Jake came to me with this story about how you'd been bragging to the guys about how you were going to dump me before college so you could be free to date other girls. He said you were just using me for the summer, that you were embarrassed to be seen with the new girl from Tennessee. My blood ran cold. Maggie, I never said any of those things. I was planning to propose to you that night, on my birthday. I had a ring and everything. I know that now, but I was 18 and scared and so hurt. Jake seemed so sincere, and he had details, things about our conversations that he said you'd shared with the other guys. He said you told everyone that I was naive and clingy, that you couldn't wait to get away from me. I could barely breathe. But I loved you, Maggie. You had to know that. I thought I did, but Jake was so convincing. And then he said that if I really loved you, I should break it off cleanly, save you the embarrassment of having to dump me yourself. He said it would be kinder that way. So you avoided my calls. I told my mother to tell you I was seeing someone else. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, Frank. I cried for weeks, but I thought I was doing the right thing, saving us both from a messy breakup. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what she was telling me. But you did start dating Jake. Not right away. He kept coming around, being sweet and supportive, telling me he'd always cared about me, and that he'd wait however long it took. I was so broken up about losing you that I wasn't thinking clearly. When he asked me to the movies a few weeks after you left for college, I said yes, partly because I was lonely, and partly because I thought it might help me get over you. And you fell in love with him. Maggie was quiet for a long moment. I learned to love him, Frank. Jake was a good man, and he loved me completely. We had a good marriage, raised 2 wonderful children together. But I never felt for him what I felt for you, not even close. Why didn't you ever try to contact me, to tell me the truth? I wanted to, so many times. But by the time I realized Jake had been lying about what you'd said, you were already dating other people. I heard through the grapevine that you'd met someone at college, and I thought maybe you really had moved on. Maybe Jake had been right about boys not being serious in high school. She reached into her purse and pulled out something that made my heart stop. It was the St. Christopher medal she'd given me, the one I'd worn every day until I'd finally taken it off and put it in a drawer after Linda and I got engaged. Jake gave this back to me right before he died, 5 years ago. He'd been sick for a while, and in his final weeks, he had this need to confess things, to clear his conscience. He told me about the lies he'd told, how he'd broken us up because he wanted me for himself. He said he'd felt guilty about it their entire marriage, but he'd been too afraid of losing me to tell the truth. I took the medal from her trembling hand, feeling the familiar weight of it, remembering how she'd fastened it around my neck that day by the river. He kept this all these years. He said he took it from your locker at school, along with a letter you'd written to me that you never got to send. He wanted to make sure there was no way for us to reconnect. She reached into her purse again and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written on it in my own teenage handwriting. This is the letter you wrote to me, Frank. Jake saved it, and he gave it to me before he died. Do you want to read it? With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter I'd written 50 years ago, the words I'd poured my heart into when I was trying to figure out why Maggie had broken up with me. My dearest Maggie, it began, and reading my own words from half a century ago brought tears to my eyes. It was full of confusion and hurt, but also deep, abiding love. I'd written about how I couldn't understand what I'd done wrong, how I'd been planning to propose, how I couldn't imagine a future without her in it. When I finished reading, we both sat there crying, mourning not just what we'd lost, but all the years we'd missed together, all the misunderstandings and pain that could have been avoided if one jealous boy hadn't been so determined to break us up. Frank, Maggie whispered, is there any chance, after all these years, that we could try again? I know we're not the same people we were at 18, but I still love you. I've always loved you. Friends, I want you to understand something. I'm a practical man, an engineer by training, someone who believes in logic and reason and thinking things through carefully. But sitting there in that hotel lobby with the woman I'd never stopped loving, holding a 50-year-old love letter and a St. Christopher medal that represented everything we'd lost, logic went right out the window. Yes, I said without hesitation. Yes, I'd like that very much. We talked until sunrise that morning, catching up on 50 years of life, sharing stories about our children and grandchildren, our careers and losses and joys. When the sun started streaming through the hotel windows, we were still holding hands like teenagers, making plans for a future we thought was impossible. That was 8 months ago. Maggie and I have been together ever since, making up for lost time with the urgency of two people who know how precious and fleeting love can be. She moved up here to Minneapolis to be with me, and last month, on what would have been our 51st anniversary if we'd never been separated, I gave her that same ring I'd bought for her birthday in 1973. The one I'd kept all these years, through my marriage to Linda, through moves and life changes, and decades of thinking I'd never see Maggie again. She said yes, by the way. We're getting married next spring, in a small ceremony with our children and grandchildren. It won't be the fairy tale wedding we might have had at 22, but it'll be ours, and that's all that matters. Now I know some of you might be thinking this sounds too good to be true, like something out of a romance novel. But I'm here to tell you that sometimes, if you're very lucky and the stars align just right, life gives you a second chance at happiness. Sometimes love really does conquer all, even 50 years of separation and heartbreak. The tragedy of our story isn't that we lost each other. It's all the years we missed in between. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we needed those years, those experiences, those other loves and losses and lessons, to become the people we are now, people who know how to appreciate what we have and not take it for granted. Jake Peterson died believing he'd won, that his lies and manipulation had given him the life he wanted. And in a way, maybe he did win for a while. But love, real love, has a way of finding its way back, even across decades, and despite the worst intentions of jealous hearts. So that's my story, friends. A love lost and found, a second chance that came just when I'd given up hoping for one. It's a reminder that it's never too late for a new beginning, that sometimes the best chapters of our lives are still waiting to be written. Now, before I sign off, I need to ask you again to please hit that subscribe button. Having just 4 of my viewers subscribed really does hurt an old man's feelings, and your support means the world to me. Give this video a thumbs up if it touched your heart, and leave me a comment about your own experiences with love, loss, or second chances. I read every single comment, and your stories inspire me to keep sharing mine. Until next time, this is Frank Morrison reminding you that life is full of mind-blowing stories, and sometimes the most incredible ones are true. Take care of yourselves, and don't give up on love, no matter how old you get or how impossible it might seem. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.